This video is all about religious discrimination at work in California. Keep watching to find out what's allowed and what's not. To start, what in the heck is religious discrimination anyway? If you're an atheist, are you protected? What if you believe in something really obscure? We'll unpack all of that, but first let's look at the law. California Fair Employment and Housing Act, section 12940, subsection A, says that it is an unlawful employment practice for an employer to take an adverse action against an employee due to his or her religious creed. What does that mean? You can't fire somebody, demote someone, refuse to hire, cut somebody's pay if your action is motivated by that victim's religion or religious creed. Okay, well, is that it? Well, no, the law goes much further. It also contains a harassment component. The same statute, subsection J, says that it's an unlawful employment practice for any employer to harass an employee due to their religious creed. Similarly, if a coworker harasses an employee and the employer knew or should have known that the harassment was taking place, the employer can be liable for that as well. At its core level, harassment based on religion generally looks like this. Somebody's making jokes, sending offensive text messages or emails, or the one person who has the particular faith is always on the outside and is treated poorly because of their religion. You can't create an abusive working environment for somebody due to their religion. If you do, harassment law has been violated. Similarly, you also can't retaliate against somebody if they oppose practices forbidden by the law. For example, if somebody's being harassed or treated poorly due to their religion and they complain about it at work and then the employer wants to fire them, that's not allowed. That's retaliation. On a similar vein, if an employee goes and complains and says, Susie is my friend, she's also my coworker. She's being harassed by Bob, her supervisor, and she's being harassed because of her religion. Well, you've now made a complaint. Even though the harassment isn't going to you, it's going to Susie, you've made a complaint, you've opposed practices under the law. If the company retaliates against you for making that complaint, the law has also been violated. It's not uncommon that somebody's religious beliefs will conflict with what their employer wants them to do. For example, a Jewish man who refuses to work on the Sabbath because he's not supposed to. Or a Muslim woman who has to wear a hijab in violation of the company look or dress code. What are employers and employees supposed to do in these situations? Well, we can look at the law for guidance. California Fair Employment and Housing Act 12940, same law as up here, but subsection L gives us the answer. It says that when there's a conflict and an employee doesn't want to do something due to their religion, the employer must explore any available reasonable alternative means of accommodating the religious belief or observances. What does that mean? At its essence, an employer should make every reasonable effort to accommodate that employee's beliefs. If there is no reasonable accommodation that can be made, then the employer can transfer that person, fire that person, demote that person, change their situation so that the employer can conduct their business in a way that is economically viable. However, what does reasonable mean? At the end of the day, 12 people in a jury box, 12 of your peers in a jury box are going to make that determination. Employers are not held hostage by people's religious beliefs, and they don't have to spend millions of dollars just accommodating one person's quirky little religious idea. And at the same time, employees don't have to bend to the will of their employer in all times, at all circumstances. At the end of the day, what the jury is going to look at is what is reasonable, and the employer is required to make reasonable efforts to find an alternative and reasonable accommodation. Before we look at any examples, let's define what religious creed actually is. According to the law, religious creed includes traditionally recognized religions as well as beliefs, observances, or practices which an individual sincerely holds. and which occupy in his or her life a place of importance parallel to that of traditionally recognized religions. With that definition in mind, let's look at some examples. Well, there's a famous case where a Muslim woman was working at a very trendy retailer, and she wanted to wear a hijab, and somehow that conflicted with the company, and they fired her. I think they fired her, and she filed a lawsuit which got appealed all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which held the company broke the law. They shouldn't have fired her. Because it's very easy for a company to accommodate that, and there's no economic, detriment to it. The next example, well, actually, no. Let's flip that. What if your religion requires you to be naked? Does a company have to accommodate you so you go to work naked? Well, the answer is obviously no. Nobody would think that that's reasonable. So there are limits to the reasonable accommodation doctrine, if we call it that. The next example would be a Jewish man working on the Sabbath or a Muslim man having to pray at a certain period of time during the day. Courts have pretty much universally held that it's very reasonable that they just simply schedule them at different times. Now, there's limits to that. If you said, well, I only work on Mondays and no other day of the week, I don't think anybody would find that to be reasonable. There was an interesting case a couple years ago that came out of the Department of Corrections, where an individual refused to work any overtime, and he said it was because he was a sun-worshiping atheist, and that he started his own religion and he was its only member. Well, the court held that's not a religion, and did not let his case proceed. But that raises an interesting question. What about atheism? Well, it's an open question in the case law. At the end of the day, think of it in the reverse. If you are working for a company and the majority, the owners of the company, are of a certain religious belief or anti-religious belief, and you are of a certain belief or anti-belief, if you get fired because you don't conform to the company, is that against the law? Well, a lot of lawyers will say yes, and a lot of lawyers will probably say no. So it's an open question. So if you're in that example, call a lawyer, because it'd be very interesting to see that play out. I handled the case, although it's settled, where a Christian man was fired, he alleged, because he wasn't atheist, or actually it was because the company founders were objectivists. Very interesting, part of the Ayn Rand philosophy. At the end of the day, we'll never know what the law would say about it because the case settled, but still very interesting. If you're a victim of religious discrimination, there are remedies that are built into the law for you. Specifically, there's 4 main types. If you get fired from your job, you have economic damages. And it plays out like this. Let's say you were making $55,000 a year, and then you're fired because of your religion. You're not making $55,000 a year anymore. That's a very tangible economic loss that a jury can measure. But next up on our list are what we call emotional distress damages. Those are the damages for the pain and the suffering and the anguish that somebody goes through as a result of being fired because of their religion. And those are minimized in society, but they are very real and are often the largest component of these cases. You can also win your attorney fees because the Fair Employment and Housing Act allows for the recovery of attorney fees on top of your damages. Those generally go to the attorneys, but the point is that they often force employers into early settlement negotiations because attorney fee liability can be substantial. Finally, if you prove your case with malice, oppression, or fraud, you can win punitive damages. Now, everybody's heard about punitive damages, and everybody thinks they're going to win them, but they're really hard to win. Because you not only have to prove them with malice, oppression, or fraud, but they're really rare and judges don't like them. So you have to have a really egregious case. But all of that combined, you go, well, how much can I win? How much? How much are religious discrimination cases worth? Well, the answer is we don't know. Employment lawyers hate the how much question because every case is so different. It's impossible to generalize. And we don't have statistics out there on what the average case is worth because almost all cases settle. And those settlement agreements are confidential, so it doesn't get reported to these statistic gathering companies. So at the end of the day, I can tell you this. If you're a victim of religious discrimination and you're able to find a good employment lawyer, one who will take the time, energy, and money that it requires to pursue the case, you're more than likely to be satisfied with the financial outcome of the case. I hope this video has been helpful. Take care.